Mary Elsie Houghtaling, 1899 to 1996. Part 2, 1930 to 1996. In the summer of 1930, Bill Hill has two serious accidents while working on the railroad. Mary describes the accidents and Bill's recovery in the following recording.
And Dan was just a baby. So he went out on the road, and it seems to me like he was running between
This is
houses.
Bill going out on the road.
Huh?
This is grandfather going out on the road.
Yeah. And he was running between Oskaloosa and Washington, Iowa, I believe, at that time. Anyway, no, he was going through a tunnel anyway, back in the beginning in this story. And they had a terrible rain for several days down in Iowa, down in that part of the state, and the railroad tracks were, in some places they were spreading or in danger of spreading. Well, they went along here, and this was right along the river, and there was a lot of riprap along the river to keep the soil, from leaching down into the river, and loosening the tracks, and so they were pretty scary about that. Well, Bill happened to be on the side he was firing that day instead of running the engine, and his engineer was L.E. Butts, and so when they thought the rails were spreading, why, L.E. says to him, "Well, you'll have to jump, Bill, because I can't get out until you do." So Bill jumped.
You mean that the engine was going to derail right there on it?
Well, they thought they thought the track was spreading, from the rains. So Bill jumped out.
Well, how fast was the train going?
Well, they was trying to stop as fast as they could, but then they didn't want to be under it when it fell.
Right.
So anyway, Bill jumped out on this riprap and broke both his legs.
Jeez. Now, what's riprap? Is that?
Well, rocks and stuff that they had put up there to
stabilize,
bolster up the tracks. And so.
And he cracked his back too.
So there he was. Well, by the time he got into the rocks, the train had gradually stopped, so it never did actually turn over.
Right.
But Ellie got out behind him, but he didn't have to jump. He stepped down out of the train, out of the engine. Well, of course, when he couldn't get up or walk or anything, why, they called the ambulance and had him come and picked him up out of the rocks and took him to the hospital. Well, that involved then going. They brought him home first, and then
When was this? Was Dan born? Dan was just born.
Dan was a baby, and so then they took him to Chicago, to the central office, wherever they. In Chicago for the Rock Island, and of course he was in the hospital. Well, they set both of these legs and put him in casts, and then they brought him home. So all that summer he was in casts, but then he finally had to go back to Chicago and have these casts removed. Well, then they sent him back to Knoxville, but he wasn't able to go to work yet, and they had a Rock Island doctor there in Knoxville that they had him go to to visit him, to see when he was ready to go back to work. And then finally the doctor thought he could, and I don't know how many months this was, until he was sent back to Chicago, and they examined him and said yes, he could start, he could work, just try it and see how he got along. And so he went back to work. Well, he worked just a couple of days a week for 3 weeks or 4 or something like that. And then they told him to try to see if he could stand it a week. So exactly 1 week to the day, as he was coming into Knoxville across South 7th Street, the engine blew up and blew him right out of the engine, face first, onto the pavement.
You're kidding.
No, I'm not.
How fast was the train? How fast? Well, doesn't
Well,
matter.
it's coming into Oskaloosa. And there's a roundhouse right there in Oskaloosa. And of course,
on his face.
Well, yes, it just pitched him right out on the pavement, and he lit right on his face. Well, he broke 4 or 5 ribs, and of course, it didn't help these legs any either.
Yeah, right.
And fractured 2 or 3 of the vertebrae in his back. So he was laid up again then.
Did he draw pay while he was laid up on these times, or would they?
Yes.
No, they paid him, well, at least.
Until he was, well, so anyway.
Well, what did he look like when he came home from being blown out of this?
Well, he was all scratched up, of course, and he had these broken ribs, and they had to go to the doctor and have it be taken care of right there in Oskaloosa. And that lasted all summer long. He was in bed with his fractured ribs and his broken ribs, I should say, and fractured vertebrae. And he had a cast on him.
Yeah.
Halfway around across his back and halfway around, as far as I could put it. And then during that summer, Betty and Bob and Dan got the chicken pox. Well, first, I got my cart ahead of my horse here a little bit. Before he was to be examined to see if he could go back to work again. But this time they sent him to the Minneapolis doctors. So that's where he picked up the chicken pox bug. And when he came back, not only did he have a cast on his back, he had chicken pox.
Oh, you're kidding! You're kidding.
And
this is when he came back. This is after the first accident.
No.
Oh, this is after the second one.
Yeah.
And so he brought chicken pox home for all the kids too.
So
and he had chicken pox inside that cast?
Not inside of his leg cast, but inside of this brace, maybe I should call it. It was a cast type thing. He had chicken pox. Well, Dan and Betty and Bob all got the chicken pox right away, and it was in August. And of course, Dan was just a little thing then, and he had, the doctor said, well, it's hot weather, and he said, just keep lukewarm water in the bathtub and let him play in that as much as you can, because he said, otherwise he'll scratch himself so, and he'll be all scarred up. So that's where Dan spent the summer, you might say. And Bob and Betty had the chicken pox, and they were big enough to kind of be careful, and they didn't break out too bad. But anyway, they had it. Well, they all got their permits to go back to school when school started, 1st of September. And Bill was getting a little better and ready to go back to the doctor to see how he was coming along, if he could go back to work, or if he could, and he never did get to go back to work on the railroad. But anyway, the morning that the kids were ready to start, Bob and Betty were ready to start to school, Jim was broke out from head to foot. We had to go through that another 2 weeks with Jim. Well, he hated that as long as he went to school, because he was 2 weeks late getting to start to school, you know. But anyway, that was
quite a summer.
A wonderful summer.
And this is the summer you were worried about this is the summer you were worried about your heart on top of it.
This is the summer that the doctor gave me strychnine and advised me that you don't take but one, and you take them just like the director, or they'll kill you. And sometimes I wished I thought afterward, well, really, it had been easier if they had, as far as I was concerned. But anyway, we lived through it. But Bill never was able to go back to work on the railroad, and
so this is like 19.
And somehow or other, between the lawyers and the railroad, why they rooped him out of any big settlement. He never got any. They paid his doctor bills, but they never gave him anything to go on. So anyway,
Well, this must have been about 1929, somewhere in there.
Something like that. Just before the
Dan was just starting. Jim was just starting to school.
Well, I think he was in first grade.
So about 1930, I guess.
That was just when we head first broke into the Depression.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That was the first year of the Depression. Then.
Yeah.
Right after.
Right, head first into the Depression. And it was a depression, all right.
So
anyway,
Grandpa couldn't go back to work because of all of these injuries, or because of the Depression? What was?
Well, I just said that he couldn't get any settlement out of the railroad, excepting they paid his doctor bills. But he couldn't get any. You'd have thought that he could have got a good wad to start up.
Yeah.
Doing something. Well, we didn't. So that was that.
And he couldn't go back to work for the railroad because of his
Well, he wasn't able to.
He just wasn't able to do that.
Why,
kind
no,
of
he had all these.
And all that sort of stuff.
He had all these broken ribs, that had given. Of course, they'd healed up to a certain extent, but then and his back was never able to do any manual work. After that, anything that amounted to that took any really effort, because his back was in bad shape from then on.
So what did Grandpa do then?
Well, he got a.
Bill had been an engineer on the Rock Island Railroad for 20 years, but his injuries prevent him from continuing to work on the railroad. He needs a less strenuous profession. During Bill's recovery, Bill and Mary decide to use their savings to buy a small business. They purchase a small restaurant in Tama, Iowa, 45 miles north of Oskaloosa. Just as their plan gets underway, their youngest child, 3-year-old Danny, contracts a serious disease, spinal meningitis. Meningitis is an infection of the membranes covering the brain and spinal cord. This covering is called the meninges. Mary describes the ordeal.
That chicken pox, that wasn't related to when Dan got deaf, was it?
That's what?
The chicken pox, that's not how Dan got deaf, is it?
Oh, no, that he had meningitis when he was 4.
Oh, it was meningitis?
Yeah.
Huh. Did they know it was meningitis at the time?
Oh, yes.
They did, huh?
Yeah, we had, before Bill started working for these greenhouses, in between the time that he was injured on the railroad and the time that he started working there, we had moved to Tama and bought a little restaurant. And we was running that.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, this is where the pies. Is that where you were doing? No, that's different. Huh?
No, that was after we got back from there.
So you were commuting. Wait a minute. So before he started at the greenhouse, you were living at Tama then?
Yeah. After he didn't have any more railroad work or anything. There wasn't anything in Oskaloosa that he knew of that he could do.
Uh-huh.
So then we decided, well, we'd try and what little money we had saved, we'd buy in some little business. Well, we went around and looked at different things, and we finally found this little restaurant in Tama, Iowa, and we moved up there. And that's where Dan got meningitis. And Brother Bill was with us up there. That was before he and Neil were married. And so he was there with us. And when Dan got sick, I called a doctor at Waterloo. That was the closest place that you could get a doctor. And I told him about having this high temperature. And he said, oh, most mothers worry, but he said a child that age, they'll just... they'll have a high temperature today, and by tomorrow you'll never know anything's the matter with him. He said I wouldn't worry too much about it. Give him a couple of aspirin, one about 4 hours apart, and he said that'll probably take his fever down. Well, the next morning he had such a high fever, and his head was beginning to be drawn way back.
Wow.
And so I called our old doctor at Oskaloosa and talked to him, and he said, well, that sounds pretty serious to me. He said, I think you better load him into the car and bring him down here. Well, we didn't have a car, but Bill had a little Ford coupe. And so Bill and me and Dan down to Dr. Barnes.
Uh-huh.
And he took us right, he said he said, you call me and tell me when you're starting, and he said, I'll kind of watch for you. And he was just a little ways down the street, his office, from the Mercy Hospital in Oskaloosa. So he said, you take him to the Mercy Hospital, and I'll be there when you get there. So he was. And they examined him, and then they made spinal punctures, and when they did that, the fluid, instead of coming out of his back at clear like water,
Yeah.
one about the rate of 1 or 2 drops a minute, why it just gushed out, and it was just like milk. Well, he said, then they knew that that's what it was, and they said if that had been a few hours later, it would have thickened up, and then you couldn't get it out. And he'd have died right there.
Wow. Wow.
But as it was, they took, and then they didn't have an isolation ward at Mercy Hospital, so they took us out to Mahaska Hospital and put us in the isolation ward in the basement.
Uh-huh.
And we had 2 nurses, and then I took the 3rd shift in the night. I stayed with him in the night. And
So
why?
Well, who's looking after the kids back at home? I guess Bill, huh?
Well, Bill.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we had to close up the restaurant, and then I never did go back to Tama. Brother Bill went back as soon as he got us in the hospital. He went back to Tama and reported what the diagnosis was, and so they sold out the restaurant and loaded up everything that belonged to us and came back to Oskaloosa. And they got a house out on North 11th Street, which was just a couple, 3 blocks from the Mahaska Hospital, and moved in, and I was still in the hospital with Dan,
Still doing your shift?
taking my
there?
3rd shift.
All right.
And that went on. Well, then they came out and they'd make these spinal punctures every 9 hours and draw out the fluid out of his back and put in the antitoxin shot, you know. And I can just see Dr. Barnes. He'd get down on his knees by the side of the bed, and then he'd say, "Now, Danny, put your arms around my neck," and Dan would put his arms around his neck, and Dr. Camel would make the spinal punctures, and then.
Well, that's no fun. I've had a spinal. You've had a spinal too, haven't you? It's no fun.
But for a little kid, 4 years old,
boy.
you know, that was pretty
Yeah,
rough.
yeah, sure was.
So anyway, I don't know how, I can't remember how many days we were or how many weeks we were in the hospital, but it was quite a long time. And during that time, for some unaccountable reason I will never know, they wouldn't let Jim go to school. They let Betty and Bob go, but they were going to one ward, and Jim was going to a different ward, and they wouldn't let him go while Dan had meningitis.
Why would they let the older kids go?
I don't know. Just some of the school rules, and that's the way it was. So anyway, then in the fall, now this was in the late, just about this time of year, late winter and early spring when he had meningitis, and we got him down there. And then in the fall, when it was time for the kids to go back to school, of course he wasn't old enough to go until, I guess he was too, in the fall. He would be 5 in October, and school started in September. And so he thought maybe he could go to school, but he couldn't hear a word, you know. Well, Dr. Barnes' little grandson was about his age, and of course he knew Gussie. And so he thought, well, he could do whatever Gus did, and he'd get by. And we thought, well, it would be good for him to be with other kids if he could. And in the meantime, every afternoon I took him up to doctor in Oskaloosa, and he was a blind doctor, but he was a chiropractic. And so he thought maybe he could give him some kind of muscular exercises there that might possibly bring his hearing back. But it had paralyzed his auditory nerves. and so he couldn't.
Well, that was the sort of side effects of the toxins.
Well, no, it was the side effects of the 105-degree temperature for so many days.
Mm-hmm.
If that old fool up at Waterloo had come over there or had me bring him to Waterloo or examine him, but he just put me off. And when I got up the next morning, here his head was right back like this, you know.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's what happened. And then
the thing about it is there's so many things a kid can have when he has a fever. I mean, how could you have known?
Well, that's it. I wasn't a doctor,
You can't make a guess. And then you got the doctor telling you that to give him an aspirin every 4 hours.
And then when I got down there that morning to the hospital, and they took my land, those doctors, all of their faces was way long, and when they realized that here they had a kid with spinal meningitis right there in their hospital and didn't even have an isolation ward, so they sent us out to the other one. Well, anyway, he lived through it. So then that involved, after poor little kid, he went to school, and the teacher, they had a bunch of stick horses with heads on them out here, so kids could get on them and play like they was riding their horses. So for exercise at recess, why she had them go out and run around the schoolhouse 2 or 3 times on their horses. Well, he thought that was fine, but he just took it for granted that she had given him this stick horse, So when he went around the schoolhouse like this, right back of Gussie Sundstrom, this little doctor's little grandson, why, he just thought everybody was supposed to go home, so he just took out across the schoolyard and went home. We just lived 5 or 6 blocks up the street, and he could go up there and then cut through the little field, where the back end of the lot, and he was home. So here he came about 2:30, I guess it was, in the afternoon, maybe 2 o'clock. And I was getting ready to take him up to the doctor after school, And here he came dashing in riding his stick horse. And I said to him, "What is that?" He said, "The teacher gave it to me." I suppose she pulled it out of the can, and handed it to him. And so I said, "Well, that's real nice." And while I was still talking to him, why, here came the janitor across the field. He knew he was deaf, and he came running after him. So I explained to the janitor that I was ready to take him to the doctor, and we'd go now rather than wait till school was out. And so we walked back to the school with the janitor, and of course Dan understood then. In the meantime, I could tell him that he wasn't supposed to come home. So then he just kind of laughed about it, and when we got to the schoolhouse, we saw the teacher, and then we went on to town to this doctor.
Could he read lips already?
Had his treatment. I could make him understand pretty well.
What would you do? Just make...
Well, just did the best I could.
Sign? You hadn't studied signing or anything?
Well, when he saw the janitor coming, he knew there was something, that wasn't right. And so then I explained to him that he wasn't supposed to come home. It wasn't, I showed him on the clock, it wasn't time yet. And that was, then he understood, and then he kind of laughed about it because he realized he'd done the wrong thing, But I'll never forget that. And then this poor old doctor, he had a watch. See, he was blind, and he had a watch that chimed just like a clock, only little tiny tinkle, and that's the way he knew when the 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock or whatever. And he tried real hard, and he could tell when we came for the visit, he could tell by Dan's walk. When that little kid came in the door, he knew that's who it was, and he'd come out. And of course then Dan realized that he was blind, so it was quite a situation. But he did the best he could by him, and he wrote to him when he was at school. He got 2 or 3 letters from him, and one time he wrote a poem, and I've got it someplace in my junk, but I don't know where it is. This old blind doctor, Dr. Cornier, his name was. Well, anyway, so then that fall, we had to take him to the school for the deaf at Council Bluffs.
So how old was Dan when he went off to the council?
5. He was
5
5.
years
He
old.
went in September, and he was 5 in
He
October.
went clear out to Council Bluffs, huh?
Yeah. Well,
Wow.
no. See, he started school there in 4th Ward in Oskaloosa, and then at Christmas time we took him to Council Bluffs.
Was it a boarding? It was a boarding school,
Oh, yeah.
basically.
Yeah. And then they said to me, "Now don't come back to see him for at least 6 weeks, because it's going to take that long for him to get used to being here." And so there was a woman at Pella that had a little boy that was deaf, Dale Van Hamert, and he had started in the fall, so they went every so often, you know. So I went with them, and the first time I went to see him, it was about 6 or 8 weeks after we had taken him in there, and Mr. Fox took us when we had to take him in there to go to school, because I didn't know these people in Pella at that time. And he was our next door neighbor, just lived across the street. So they took us in the first time, and Brother Bill went with us. And anyway, then when I went back 6 or 8 weeks later to see him, there was a long dormitory, and I suppose there was 8 or 10 beds on each side, 2 rows, one on each side, 8 or 10 beds, and they all had little boys in them, you know, about Dan's age. And I thought I'd never see him. I got in the door and I looked all down this row, you know, and to the last row, and here's the last one's a beautiful little kid with big brown eyes and dark hair. And right across the last one in the other side was Dan. Just as blonde as this little kid was black, you know, dark. He wasn't black, but had dark eyes and dark hair. And he sat up, and he was just getting in bed. He had on his pajamas, and he sat up and looked just like, "Is that my mother?" You know? And then this other little kid was from Pella. And of course he spotted his mother, but she'd been there before, so he knew what to expect. Well, this was on Friday, and so the woman that was in charge of the dormitory there, she got the 2 kids up and got them, and they got dressed, you know, so we could take them out. So we took them to a motel, and then on Saturday, while we took them all around and shopped around town and so on, and took them someplace to eat away from the school. And then we stayed all night Saturday night at the motel, and then Sunday morning we took them back to the school for Sunday school, and went to Sunday school with them. And then, of course, we had dinner together with them, and then we had to leave to come back because we had to drive clear back from Council Bluffs to Pella. But then he understood, you know, that I would come to see him, that we hadn't just given him away and sent him to school. But he was so proud to pack up his things and go to school. But I don't think he understood.
He was worried that first 6 weeks. He didn't really know what was going on.
I don't think he understood, you know, that he would just be left there and there wouldn't be any of the family.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
But I've still got the first letters he wrote to me. But he got along just fine right from the start. I never had any problem or anything about having trouble with him in school. And he learned real fast, and he learned to read, and so he'd study and do his work well.
How long was he in that school?
Well, until he went clear through school.
He went clear through high school there?
Yes, he went to high school there and went clear through school.
So he'd come home in the summers, but then he'd be there the whole summer.
He'd come home in the summer, and then he'd come home at Christmas. And there'd be quite a few of them come to Des Moines, you know. And of course they'd have, after he'd been there a year or two, or they just had a ball, they'd all visit among themselves on the train coming back. And we'd always meet him in Des Moines and bring him on down until he got grown up, and then of course he'd come by himself. Come down on the bus. Yeah, it was, well, it hasn't all been easy all over the years, I'll tell you.
It's not.
But everybody's home. doing all right. And one thing, he always adjusted. Seemed like he never was moody. He's always been good natured.
Mm-hmm.
He's never been sitting around feeling sorry for himself. And of course, he's made his living ever since he got out of school.
In 1932, the Hinksons and Houghtalings get together for a reunion. In the first photo, we see in the back row, left to right, Bert Houghtaling Guthrie, Bernice Houghtaling, Mary Houghtaling Hill, Madeline Hinkson, Dade Houghtaling Guthrie, Irma Hinkson. In the front row, from left to right, we see Betty Hill, Ortel Hinkson, Gertrude Guthrie, Daisy's daughter, and Daisy's daughter. In the second photo, we see in the front row, from left to right, Gertrude Guthrie, Ortel Hinkson, and Betty Hill. In the middle row, we see Magna Wilcox, Bert's friend, Bert Houghtaling Guthrie, Dade Guthrie, and then Isidore Gertrude May Hinkson Houghtaling, nicknamed Gertie. And then finally, Mary Houghtaling Hill with her arm around Gertie. In the back row, we see Irma Hinkson, Madeline Hinkson, and Ida Hinkson. In 1934, Mary's father, William Wilbur Houghtaling, is sick with membranous croup and dies on July 4th in Nevada, Iowa. Gertie is living in Greeley, Colorado. To comfort each other, the women in the family write a chain letter in the aftermath of Willie Wilbur's death. He is 70 years of age. In 1935 to 1938, after Danny's bout with meningitis, Bill and Mary moved back to Oskaloosa. The family lives at 608 East 6th Avenue, which they call the acreage. They plant the 2.5 acres with berries and fruit trees. They install a new furnace in the basement and lay a water line from their well so that they have indoor plumbing. To support the family, Bill takes a variety of jobs and Mary bakes pies. Mary describes life on the acreage in this recording.
No.
It's just wasting that.
It's not wasting tape. That tape is.
Huh.
He doesn't trust me.
Well, anyway, so I did. And so in 2 years, we had all the raspberries we needed, both kinds, red and black both.
Now, where is it? This is in Oskaloosa, isn't it?
Yeah, on the acreage. But as I say, there wasn't anything there, and it was running right into the depression,
Yeah.
And,
So, what did you have? A couple acres around the house? Is that what it was?
2.5.
Oh.
The railroad track cut it off down one corner. And then about the same time, not exactly, but a few months between, I ordered some cherry trees and a couple of peach trees and a couple of apple trees. And we set them out, the kids and I. And the kids were just little kids.
Wow.
And most of the holes we dug with a fire shovel. You know what that is?
No.
We also dug the hole, the ditch, I guess you'd call it, to put the water in.
To irrigate it.
No, not to irrigate, to drink, to put water in the house. When we first went there. And we started at the house and dug out across the lot. And when we got to the road, of course, we had to hire the city to come and run it across the road to connect it to the water. And we dug that, and we had to put it down 3 feet.
Wow.
So it wouldn't freeze.
So the house came with a well, is all it had, I guess.
Yeah. And, well, we dug that and had the pipe, got in touch with the city and had them lay the pipe, and so we had water in the house then.
Well, the kids weren't very big when you were digging that. Well, who was digging? You and Betty, I guess. Huh?
No, Bob and Jim and I dug it. I don't think Betty, I don't remember that she helped. She might have. But it was a family project, you know.
Mhm.
We went in and got that put in there. And then Jim, he was talking the other night, it had, we put in a new furnace. And we had to dig a place out. Now there was part of the basement, the stairs went down and there was a big room there and it was cemented. It was pretty nice. That was that. And then that was when I started making pies.
20 or 30 pies a day. So would you? When would you start baking pies in the morning? Would you get up?
Oh, around
Correct.
2:30, 3 o'clock.
Oh, you're kidding.
Oh,
That early in the morning?
boy, how many pies do you think you could make before kids went to school in the morning?
Yeah. That's terrible, Mary.
And lots of nights I used to make a shirt after the kids went to bed.
Well, when did you sleep? How much did you sleep at night?
I didn't much. Standing on my feet, I think, rolling out pie crust.
You must have been making pie crust in your sleep. Well, 20 or 30 pies a day, you're right. And that counts. You've got to do all the fruit and everything, don't you? Right?
Well,
you're not pouring that fruit out of cans.
I bought the fruit in 5-gallon cans, most of them.
Yeah, I was about to say if you were peeling apples for 30 pies, you'd be working 30 hours a day.
Well, I did put
You
some
probably
apples.
were.
I did put some of apples in it, but mostly I bought stuff.
What kind of an oven did you have? How many pies could you do?
Big old coal cook stove.
Mhm.
And then I had to get another one. I bought a little electric stove because when I made soft pies that had meringue on the top, they had to have a place to brown, and I didn't have time. I had to get the other ones in that big oven, you know. So I got that little electric one. It'd hold 8 pies. I could put 4 on one place and 4 on another, on one shelf, and 4 on another, and turn it just right to bake them.
Uh-huh.
I mean to brown the meringue. Most everybody that took pies, they take so many fruit pies and so many meringue.
No.
Soft pies.
So you had like a standing order with your various clients. Huh? What would you sell a pie for? What would you get for it?
23 cents.
Oh, you're kidding.
No, I'm not. 23 cents.
Boy. And then you pay 10 cents for the delivery to that place.
Well, yeah, unless Bob took them. But the Checkerboard Cafe, they always wanted 13 pies on Saturday morning and 13 in the afternoon. And finally, when the store where we bought the lard and sugar, and flour and stuff, the prices went up. They put the price of sugar up and the price of lard. I've been getting lard 3 pounds per quarter, and when they put it up to 10 cents a pound or something like that, I wrote a note to go with the Saturday afternoon pies to the Checkerboard Cafe. Bob had to make 2 or 3. He had to make at least 2 trips to take 13 pies.
Yeah, sure.
Why, I sent a note with the last batch that he took and told her that because of the raise in price of these essential ingredients, why, I'd have to raise it to 25 cents a pie. And she flew so mad, she told him to just take them home.
Oh, you're kidding.
Right that afternoon, she didn't take advantage of the afternoon pie. She sent them home.
Because you raised your price 2
Because
cents.
the last box only took. I suppose it was 6 or 8 of them. Well, several of the neighbors had called and wanted to know if I had an extra pie they could have. So we didn't have any trouble getting rid of the pies. When he brought them back, well, Mrs. Ronsby's down on the corner. She wanted a couple of pies if she could get them. She's going to have company, didn't have time to make them.
Well, was that it for the Checkerboard Cafe?
Yeah. No, she just was a neighbor, and she called in, wanted a pie, and I didn't.
No. I mean, after that, did the Checkerboard Cafe ever come back and start their order up again, or did they?
No, they never did, and I was glad. But I couldn't imagine when she could have taken that afternoon's pies at the same price, you know. And she just flew bad, and she said, "Well, just take them home. I'm not going to pay it." And Bob said to her, "Well, you don't have to pay it till Monday." "Well, I'm not going to pay it at all. Just take them home." So he brought them home. And he said, "Mother, what do you do with all these pies?" And I said, "Well, Mrs. Ronsby wants two. If I had them," but I said, "I told her I didn't have them, but I'll call her back." So I called her back, and she was tickled at that to get them. I think she would be.
You're a pretty good pie maker by then.
Well, you know, you're going to have company, and you don't know what the dickens to have for dessert, and you can get a couple of pies from the neighbor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
For 46 cents. But 46 cents looked big in those days, I'll tell you.
Well, it was like $4.60.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's probably
So
quite right.
we got rid of the pies. Of course, there was hardly ever a pie left over for us, you know, so we didn't mind having a couple of pies in our own family.
Sure.
Water in the house, and we had a nice furnace, where before we'd had just a big old heating stove, you know.
So did you put in the furnace?
Well, we had it put in. It was a pipeless furnace. It just had the one, you know. Have you ever seen a pipeless furnace? They were all the rage at that particular
Well,
time.
how did the heat get from the furnace to the house? Just
Well, you put this furnace in, and then when you there was a round place where the heat came up, and then the cold air went down around it. Around it, you know, it came up here, and there's a great big register, bigger than this, big square. And the heat came up in the center, and then the cold air went down around the edges. It worked real well.
it just sort of worked its way up to the
If you
house.
open the stair door, you got a lot of heat upstairs, you know. When Jim was talking about the other night, he remembered, he said, when they dug the other section of the basement to put the furnace in. And he was just a little kid. He couldn't have been any more than 5th grade. But people used to work, but they had to, you know. They worked together, the whole family. The kids weren't turned loose to run over everybody else's stuff.
Yeah.
So then after that year, well, we always had red raspberries and black raspberries, and after a couple of years we had cherries,
And then you had your
and
apples.
eventually we had apples and peaches. About that time, it's time to go.
Would you have moved if Dan hadn't come down with the meningitis? You weren't planning to move, were you?
Oh, that was a long time before that.
No, I know that, but did you move off of the acreage? Was it off the acreage that you moved, that the whole family moved when Dan was in the hospital with spinal meningitis? No?
That we moved out back down there after he.
Oh, you moved to the acreage after Dan. Oh, I see. I didn't realize that. I thought this was before Dan came down with that.
He was going to school for the deaf at that time.
So this would be about 1931 or 32.
Somewhere in there, I don't know.
Start of the.
Living in Oskaloosa, Iowa in 1935 was marked by the Great Depression, impacting people of various backgrounds. Many residents faced financial hardships due to the economic downturn. Unemployment rates were high, affecting families across different social classes. On May 3rd, 1937, the Hinksons and their families get together to celebrate Gertie Hinkson's 75th birthday. Clarence and Daisy Guthrie's farm in Des Moines appears to be the celebration site. In the first photo, we see in the front row Clarence Guthrie, Ida Hinkson, Betty Hill, Daisy Guthrie, Gertrude Guthrie, Daisy's daughter, Mary Houghtaling Hill, Ortel Hinkson, Madeline Hinkson. In the back row, we see Laurie Hinkson holding Derwin McKinney, Irma's son, then Irma Hinkson, Richard Guthrie, Daisy's son. Laurie Hinkson is the son of Charles Hinkson. Laurie's children with Ida are Irma, Madeline, Walter, and Artel. In the second photo, we see Mary Elsie Hill, Bernice Houghtaling, Bertha Houghtaling Guthrie, and Daisy Houghtaling Guthrie, with Danny Hill in the foreground. In 1940, Bill and Mary reside on the acreage at 608 East 6th Avenue in Oskaloosa. The house was built in 1910. It has 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and 920 square feet. Bill is 50. He has had a variety of jobs since retiring from the railroad: night watchman, firing of furnaces, working as a horticulturalist. Mary is 41. She has been running a pie baking business. The other members of the household are Elizabeth, nicknamed Betty, age 19, Robert, age 17, James, aged 15, and Dan, age 13. In the coming years, Bob and Jim joined the armed forces fighting in World War II. With the onset of World War II, the town's focus shifts towards supporting the war effort. Many young men from Oskaloosa enlist in the military, while those on the home front participate in rationing and war bond drives to support the troops. Jim registers for the draft on December 11, 1942. He lists his occupation as a student. He is 18 years old. He enlists in the U.S. Army on September 24, 1943. He served stateside in the U.S. Army 41st Evacuation Hospital Special Service Company 6th Station Hospital. The hospital treats approximately 250 casualties per day. He receives an honorable discharge on March 28, 1946. Jim is withdrawn and has minimal social contacts for the rest of his life. Bob enlists in the armed forces on April 14, 1943. He lists his occupation as skilled inspector. In 1944, Bob is in the 8th Air Force Bomber Station in England. He serves on the crew of a B-17 bomber named Fancy Nancy as a radio operator and gunner. The plane is renowned for its hazardous and successful missions over Germany. It is a miracle that Bob survives World War II. In 1944, Mary's mother, Isadore Gertrude May Hinkson, dies on the 14th of June in Greeley, Colorado, where she had been living with her daughter Bertha. She is 82 years old. Bertie was beloved by her family. As her father-in-law, William Ephraim Houghtaling, once said, "Nobody like Gertie." In 1945, the 4 Houghtaling siblings posed for a picture. Helen, Bert, standing, Bill, seated, and Mary Houghtaling. In 1947, Bill and Mary visit Bill's brother Clarence in St. Louis. Clarence is married to Grace Belding. They have 1 daughter, Maxine, and 1 granddaughter, Elizabeth, nicknamed Kippy, Humans. In the first photo, we see from the left Grace Belding Hill, Mary Houghtaling Hill, Emma Lloyd Hill, Bill's mother and also the mother of Clarence, and then Bill Hill, and in front, Kippy. The occasion for the visit is Kippy's confirmation day. In 1947, Mary is hospital representative for the American Legion at the Veterans Administration Hospital in Knoxville. She is a volunteer. In the years that follow, she is promoted into a leadership position. In that position, she coordinates the activities of a large cadre of volunteers who work every day to improve the life and outlook of the veterans in the hospital. Mary also puts out the word that she is collecting stamps for her grandson, Stephen Arnold. She sends Steve's envelopes filled with exotic stamps for his collection. In the 1950s, sock monkeys are the rage. My cousins, siblings, and I learned about sock monkeys when Mary makes them for us and sends them to us for Christmas. In 1950, Bill and Mary reside in Knoxville, Iowa, at 1121 2nd Street between Douglas and Marion Street. Bill is a horticulturalist at the Veterans Administration Hospital in Knoxville. He supervises a staff that manages greenhouses and over 100 acres of grounds. In 1952, the Hills and Houghtalings get together in Greeley, Colorado. In the photo, we see Mary Hill holding Lynette Hill, Nielsen Schaefer Houghtaling, Bill Houghtaling's wife, Bert, Michael Ringrose, Bill Houghtaling holding his daughter Sheila, then Bill Hill, Jim Ringrose, Bob Hill, Elaine Forrest Hill, Bob's wife, and on this end, Helen Houghtaling Ringrose holding Robin Hill. Also in 1952, Bill and Mary visit Dick and Liz in Arcadia, California. The family drives to the ranch to introduce Bill and Mary to Jess and Louise, Dick's parents. In the first picture, we see the two grandmothers on a porch swing with their California grandchildren. From the left, Steve, then Louise holding Tim, Lynn, Buck's daughter, and Mary. In the second picture, the group is a group photo in the avocado orchard. From the left, Steve, Jess, Bill, Liz holding Chris, and Mary. In 1953, the Robert Hill family is photographed with Mary and Bill. In the photo, we see Elaine, Bill, Mary, and Bob. In the front row, we see Robin, Danette, Dan's daughter, and Lynette. On July 10, 1955, the Hill and Houghtaling families assemble for a get-together in Knoxville. In the photo we see, in the back row, Clarence Guthrie, Bert, Daisy, Richard Guthrie, Daisy's son, Art Houghtaling, Bella, Art's wife, Mary, Jim, Elaine, Bob's wife, Bill Hill, Phyllis in front of her husband Dan Hill, Bill Houghtaling in back of his wife, Nielsen, who is holding Sheila. In the front row, we have, from the left, Bunny Viner, that's Pearl Lillian Hill, daughter of Harry G. Hill, Bill's brother, then Bella, Carolyn Viner in front of Johnny Viner, then Robin and Lynette in front of Bill, and then Danette in front of Phyllis, and Sheila at the end in front of Nielsen. In 1957, Liz takes Steve and Elisa back to Iowa by train to visit relatives. The last time Liz was in Iowa was 1945. Bob and Dan's families come to Knoxville for a barbecue. In the photo we see from the left in the back row, Mary and Bill, then in the middle row, Bob, Liz, Jim, Dan, and Phyllis Schultz Hill, Dan's wife, holding Judith. In the front row we see Steve, Danette, Lynette, Elisa Arnold, and Robin. After the barbecue, Steve stays at Bob and Elaine's house for a couple of days. One evening, Bob assembles all the kids in the front of the house to watch Sputnik, the Russian satellite, go across the sky. The next day, Robin and Lynette show Steve how to shoot wooden matches with a clothespin. A few days later, Steve spends a weekend with Clarence, Daisy, Rich, and Richard at their farm in Granger, Iowa. This is Steve's first experience on a farm. Clarence shows him how to milk a cow. At night on the back porch, he finds a Luna moth. Richard's pictures of birds at their bird feeder make a strong impression. The idea of photographing wildlife has never occurred to Steve. In 1959, Mary and Bill posed for a photo with their grandchildren. We see in the back Bob Hill and his wife Elaine, Mary, and Bill. In the front, we see Robin, Lynette, and Danette. In 1960, Mary and her sisters, Daisy and Bert, visit Dick and Liz Arnold in Arcadia, California. Helen drives over from Riverside. In the first picture, we see the group assembled on the back porch. From the left, Daisy, Mary, Bert, and Helen. In the front row, we see Steve in front of Tim, then Liz and Elisa. In the second photo, we see the four sisters in front of some citrus trees: Bert, Daisy, Helen, and Mary. Mary's straightforward manner can be a little hard on the male ego. On the weekend of her visit, Mary sits in the backyard while Dick does some gardening. "Dick," Mary says, "are you trying to kill that tree?" She points to a young tulip poplar that has been staked up in the middle of the yard. Dick walks over to the tree and sees that the wire that holds the rapidly growing tree in place has cut deeply into its bark. In 1960, Mary poses with Art, Bert, and Daisy with their spouses. We see from the left Bella, Art, Bert, Mary, Daisy, and Clarence. In 1962, Mary and her sisters visit their brother Art and his wife Bella in Osage, Iowa. We see from the left Mary, Bert, Daisy, Art, and Bella. Mary's brother Arthur Houghtaling dies on June 28, 1964 in Osage, Iowa. He is 69 years old. In 1965, Mary and Bill posed for this photograph. Mary's husband, William Leonard Hill, dies of a heart attack on December 12, 1968 in Knoxville. In this 1898 photo, Bill's father, William Thomas Hill, is in the middle. 10-year-old Bill is on the right, and his brother Harry is on the left. Bill Leonard Hill is 80 years old when he dies. In August 1970, we see Daisy Mamie Campbell, Mary's second cousin and once removed and lifelong friend, Mary and Jim outside a church. Mary's sister, Helen Margaret Houghtaling, dies on November 13, 1970 in Riverside, California. She is 65 years old. In 1972, Mary retires from her voluntary position as hospital representative of the American Legion Auxiliary at the Veterans Administration Hospital in Knoxville. She served in that position for 25 years, since 1947. On September 22, 1972, the hospital holds a special ceremony, Appreciation Day for Mrs. Mary Hill. In the first photo, we see Mary's son, Bob, introducing the guests at the ceremony. In the next photo, we see Mary receiving her plaque. In the last photo, we see the assembled group of the volunteers that worked with Mary. Mary's VA colleagues in Knoxville and across the country write 15 letters and telegraphs thanking her for her service and esprit de corps. One letter writer provides details about Mary's contributions. On numerous occasions, known only to a few individuals, Mary Hill was contacted because of financial needs of a patient or his family. The needs were graciously met. Many new or one-time activities were conducted because the auxiliary, through Mary Hill, responded with volunteer workers and material resources. The variety of activities I remember include tickets to a circus, ward socials, dances, entertainment programs, fair trips, picnics, Christmas gift distribution, the annual carnival, special parties, bingo, fishing trips. Well, you just name it, and at one time or another, the American Legion Auxiliary and Mary did it. unquote. In October 1976, we see Mary and two of her sisters sitting on a couch, Bert, Mary, and Daisy. In 1976, Liz and Dick travel to Iowa to visit relatives. In the first photo, we see from the left and back Richard Guthrie, Bob Hill, Bob's sons Robbie, Jim, and then Dan. And in the front row, we see Daisy, John Hill, Liz Hill Arnold, Dick Arnold, Elaine Hill, just visible to the left of Dick, Mary, Judith Hill Fellows, Danette Hill Umbaugh, and Jerry Umbaugh. In the second photo, we see Mary with her four children, Liz, Bob, Dan, and Jim. In the third photo, we see Dan with his children, Linda, Dan, Judith, Jerry Umbaugh, his son-in-law, and Danette. In the fourth photo, we see Bob and Elaine with their two youngest children, Robbie and John. In 1976, Mary is living at 109 South Park Lane Drive in Knoxville. Mary's sister, Bertha Rose Houghtaling, dies on February 5, 1982, in Fernwood, Idaho. Her niece, Gertrude Guthrie Gray, lives in Fernwood. Bertha is 91 years old when she dies. On their way to California in June of 1983, Steve Arnold and Lynn Houck visit Mary Hill in Knoxville. Her sister Daisy and her brother Bill are there at the same time. In the first photo, we see Steve, Mary, Daisy, and Bill on the front porch. In the next photo, Lynn has traded places with Steve. About the same time, Richard, Daisy's son, and his wife Agnes also stop by to visit. Mary's sister, Daisy Loretta Houghtaling, dies on May 10, 1987, in Granger, Iowa. She is 99 years old. In 1987, Mary's brother, Frank Robert, nicknamed Bill Houghtaling, dies in Knoxville, Iowa on August 20th. He had been living with Mary at the Park Lane house for a few years before he died. He is 86 years old. In 1989, Mary's family turns out for her 90th birthday in Knoxville. In the first photo, we see in the back row John Hill in back of Elizabeth Hill Wrights, Robert Hill Jr. in the white shirt in back of Robin Hill Macca, then Tim Arnold, Steve Arnold, Chris Arnold, Judith Hill Fellows, Danette Hill Umbaugh, and Linda Hill. In the front row, we see Laura Arnold Liebman. That's Hillary Godwin Arnold, then Lynette Hill Carmelli, holding Erin Carmelli, Elizabeth Arnold, Mary Houghtaling Hill, Angela Umbaugh, Jonathan Carmelli, and Robert Umbaugh. In the second photo, we see Helen Lois Houghtaling Mostek, Archdaughter, holding Mary's arm, Elizabeth Hill Wrights to the left of Mary, then John Hill in back of Mary, and Robin Hill Macca on the right. In the next photo, we see Mary with Steve, Liz, and Hillary Arnold Godwin. In the last photo, we see Mary with her four children, Dan, Jim, Bob, and Liz. In 1990, Mary celebrates a birthday with her daughter-in-law, Bonnie Blakesley Hill, and her grandson, Robert Umbaugh, and her great-granddaughter, Angela Umbaugh. In the next photo, we see the whole Umbaugh family with Mary. From the left to the right, Robert, Mary, Danette in back of Angela, Jerry in back of Anissa, and family friend Brad Betts on the right. In the next photo, we see Mary Alice Houghtaling Shaw, Archdaughter, with Mary. In the last photo, we see Mary with her son, Dan. When Mary was in her 90s, she remarks that she is the last leaf on her family tree. One day she answers a knock on her door. A man about her age stands at the door. She recognizes him, greets him by name, and asks if he would like to come in. The man is a boyfriend from high school. He explains that everyone in his family from his childhood is now gone. He was thinking about Mary, looked her up in the phone book, and drove over to say hello. They have a cup of coffee. For a few minutes, they escape into their teenage years, but then reality intrudes. They walk to the door and say their goodbyes. The door closes. Mary Elsie Houghtaling dies on May 25th, 1996, in Knoxville, Iowa. She is 97 years old. She has raised 4 children. Mary never forgot anyone on their birthday or at Christmas. She cared for the veterans of World War I and World War II with 25 years of full-time volunteer service. When her son Jim and her brother Bill needed a place to live, she welcomed them into her little home on Park Lane Drive and looked after them. She saved all of her family photographs and labeled them for posterity. She learned and remembered the details of the lives of over 100 people in her family. God bless Mary Hill.